Good morning, Nathan and Mike. Thanks for joining us today to talk about running for Multnomah County DA. I think I'm just going to ask each of you to start off and tell us a little bit about why you're running and why people should vote for you. And Nathan, if you don't mind going first, that'd be great.
That would be perfect. Thank you. Well, good morning. Again, my name is Nathan Vasquez, and I am running because I believe we can build a safer and better community together. And I'm going to start by telling you just a little bit about myself. I am the grandson of a Mexican immigrant, and the reason I say that is because I got to see, his example that he set for my family, and he also both by his example and very directly imprinted upon me, really a calling to community service and public service, and it's something that I've carried forward into my life. And I started with the district attorney's office about 24 years ago as an intern, and it began my very long career of serving the public and public safety and victims. And so from that, starting in 2000, I've had an amazing honor of representing our community and fighting for victims and fighting for public safety in many different areas, from juvenile law to domestic violence, to handling very serious crimes like gang and gun crimes. I spent many years prosecuting child sexual abuse and standing up for victims there. And then the last, 10 plus years, I've just been handling the most serious cases involving homicides, major sexual assaults, the violent protest cases. I'm the one that's been in court, fighting to make sure that the Proud Boys got convicted when they came to town and held Antifa accountable when they were smashing out windows and setting fires. So through that all, what I've seen is that sadly, our community in the past 4 years has become less safe under the current DA. We've seen record homicides, we've seen record crime rates, and we've had just generally a situation where sadly we've seen our residents fleeing our city, businesses leaving, and it's time for change. And I know that with experienced leadership, we can bring about that change. And I'm here to put forth ideas and proposals that will impact the daily lives of our citizens in a way in which we can have real tangible results. First and foremost, I am a leader that is going to prioritize victims first, who will prioritize community safety, and a leader that has the experience and the track record to deliver on these, and so that we can all move forward together.
Great, thank you very much. Mike, can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, thanks everybody for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you. Mike Schmidt, I'm the incumbent district attorney for Multnomah County. A little bit about my background. My first job out of college was actually teaching high school. I taught high school in the city of New Orleans. I was a public school teacher. And for me, that was a very formative moment in my career. In the public schools in New Orleans, they're still very segregated. Most of the population of students are Black. And that was really my first experience of seeing how different people are treated differently in the criminal justice system. My students were victims of crime. They were children of parents who were incarcerated and unfortunately in the position of raising their siblings. And they also, a couple of them became defendants while I was there. One of them wrongfully so, and ultimately was not prosecuted, but did have to spend a weekend in solitary confinement. And a 14-year-old in solitary confinement, I can tell you as a public school teacher, has a massive impact on their life and their trust in the system. So I moved to Oregon just weeks before Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, and came here, went to law school, became an intern in the district attorney's office for Mike Shrunk, prosecuted for about 5 years in the office from intern in 2007 till 2013. And one of the reasons I loved being a prosecutor and doing that work is because I felt like I could be the person that saw my students when they came through the system and could maybe do something different. But after doing it for 5 years, I didn't feel like I was making that change. I went to the legislature, was counsel for the House and Senate Judiciary Committee. I worked on the justice reinvestment legislation. Ultimately, I was hired by the Criminal Justice Commission to implement that legislation across the state in 2013. And if you'll recall, then the state was on the precipice of opening another prison for women, and the legislature wanted to avoid that. So they made those massive investments. I got to go and travel around the state of Oregon, county by county, get to meet all the amazing folks doing public safety work and help incentivize our systems to work with people locally in the communities. I eventually got appointed by Governor Kitzhaber to run that agency. It's a very data-driven, research-driven agency that also works on incentivizing local criminal justice systems to prioritize things like treatment over incarceration. When I ran for district attorney, it was with that in mind. I have seen over my career that elected district attorneys have been some of the most powerful forces in the legislature against criminal justice reform. So I ran for district attorney wanting to implement a lot of these different policies and practices. That's what got me started. And then, of course, you can't predict what necessarily the future holds. And I got immediately confronted with a pandemic, protests, which, where I was appointed to replace the incumbent at the time, Rod Underhill, halfway through the 60th day of the protest was my first day on the job. And it's been challenge after challenge since then. Lack of defense attorneys, gun violence in our community, all of these things throughout the pandemic really spiked. And so my job over the past 3.5, almost 4 years now, has been to take on each of those challenges. I'm very proud of the work of our office on gun violence, not only reorganizing the office to a homicide unit to be more effective, but also partnering with OHSU so that we can look at solutions on the front end. We're expecting some of those policy solutions to come in effect or to come be recommended to us this summer, which I'm really looking forward to. Catalytic converter theft, was a huge problem during the pandemic. I worked with Senator Chris Gorsuch. We got the law changed, and now that's dropped dramatically since we've put in the requirements to have VIN and proof of ownership. If it's been auto theft, retail theft, we've formed task forces. We're seeing great results on both of those fronts. And most recently, partnering with the legislature to fix Measure 110. It's been challenge after challenge since I've been in this role, but I think that's what you need is a leader that can see the challenges that they face, work collaboratively with others, know who to call, what relationships to have to be able to tackle some of the most pressing issues. And so I'm running again because there's still so much more work to do. Not only on continuing the good work that's been done on those issues, as we've seen crime dramatically decrease in all of those areas, but also because there's more work to do. I'm partnering with service organizations to help with homelessness and helping reduce barriers to people who are trying to access homes. And we were selected as a domestic violence site for a domestic violence survivor center diversion program, which we are expecting to launch this summer. So there's a lot more work to do in this community. I'm committed to doing it.
Great, thank you very much. Mike, if you can go first on this question. Over the past few years, we've seen policies adopted at both the state and local level that look to reduce, I guess, the traditional criminal justice response to various issues. So for instance, we've had the adoption of Measure 110. You've had changes in bail protocols for people who are arrested. And you have policies limiting when police can pull over a driver, for instance. Have we moved too far in that direction?
Well, I think, a lot of those policies and changes were in response to community and to people who felt like the criminal justice system was not taking into account the actual needs and safety of our community, especially communities of color. So like anything else, when you're going to change things, there are going to be things that work and things that don't work. I was a big supporter of Measure 110. I feel like and still am committed to the idea that addiction is a health issue and it takes a health solution if we're really going to help people. But I also worked with the legislature to craft 4002 because I could see that it wasn't working for our community. Both the service resources weren't coming online fast enough, and quite frankly, the unacceptable nature of people using drugs openly on our streets. I believe that House Bill 4002, when that portion of it, the PCS portion, goes into effect on September 1st, is going to address the open drug use on our streets aspect of it, which is something that I think is very important to our community. So I think whenever you're doing and working on reforms, you always understand that you are trying to fix some things, but you have to be able and willing to adapt and say when things aren't working. When it's the pretrial system, we've seen in our nation that people have been held without bail or with bail amounts that are too high for very low-level crimes, which doesn't actually keep our community more safe. And that impacts things like their housing and their jobs and other things that can have these negative external consequences. The legislature studied our pretrial system. They were concerned that there were aspects of it that were unconstitutional. for 2 years, they went and looked at other sites around the country, and they came back with a report recommending Senate Bill 48 to the legislature. I think Senate Bill 48 has done a lot of good things. In a lot of ways, it's actually tightened up our laws so that more people are held to see judges than previously. But it did change also how our bail amounts and who gets to set the bail amounts and what are those based on, which was the constitutional aspects that I think Senate Bill 48 was trying to correct for. But we also have a system where our Chief Justice sets out a Chief Justice order for the state, which sets the floor for our presiding judges to set out their orders, which dictate locally who gets held to see a judge and who doesn't. I've been very active with our presiding judge on tweaking that as we've gone. I'm just, one stakeholder. I don't get to write those orders, but I get to advocate for the positions that I think promote most public safety. And we've seen a lot of movement in that area in terms of tightening up our presiding judge orders so that people that have been convicted and or are charged with 3 crimes within a 3-year window are now being held to see a judge. Same thing with drug laws. We're seeing that people being accused of drug crimes are now being held to see judges. But there are also some things that haven't been working. Some of it has to do with communication between agencies. And I think those are things that they, are working on because I've been in those meetings. But for example, police officers communicating to the jail when somebody is charged with a super substantial quantity, which is a weird legal technical term, but it is the legal technical term. When they're charged with a super substantial quantity of drugs being held, but that needs to be communicated from police to the jail on the face sheets. So, I think there are always improvements to be made when we are doing some course correction in the state. So I think we're doing what we should do. We are responsive to community feedback and needs. And also, as we've implemented these new things, we're learning from them. We're seeing what is working, what's not, and now we're making, changes.
And to follow up on that, what I guess would you want to see the state or locally that in the next 4 years, either pulling things back or continuing to address criminal justice reforms?
Well, the biggest things that the state needs to step up with are first and foremost our defense attorney crisis. I mean, that has to get fixed. Right now, people are not being held accountable because there's no defense attorney and their case is getting ultimately dismissed way too often, which means no justice for victims. So, I mean, that has to be fixed. Another thing that has to be addressed and fixed is our state hospital. Right now, we're underneath a federal order from the courts to say that people can only be held in the state hospital so long, and it's time driven based on the crime that they are accused of committing. It's not based on whether they are ready to be released from the state hospital because the treatment has gotten them to that point. That's a bad system. I understand why the federal court's doing it because there are people languishing in jail that also have constitutional rights to get into the state hospital. But the state has to fix our state hospital resources. And then the last and final thing that the state has to step up on and continue the commitment to, which Measure 110 got started, was significant investments into our treatment services. I was at the CJC when we researched and looked at Oregon's treatment resources and access to treatment, and we ranked something like 49th in the nation. I don't know what that ranking would be today. I have to assume with the investments made that we're improving, but we're not improving fast enough, and we don't have the resources that we need right now to get people the help in that moment when they're ready to accept it. So the state has a lot of work to do.
Right. And those are existing systems and resources that are poorly managed at this point and have been poorly implemented. But I guess I'm wondering is like on the policy side, on the Measure 110 was new policy, HB 4002 revised it. You have bail reform, SB 48, and there have been some changes. So I guess what I'm wondering is on that side, are there specific policies or laws that you think need to either be shifted either towards increasing more criminal justice presence or going in the other direction?
Existing laws, I'm not thinking of other examples of existing policies or laws that I think need to be changed. A lot of it is resources and making sure that we have the resources we need to actually, meet the basics of what this system is supposed to do. So I don't have any specific.
Okay. Great, thank you. And Nathan, sorry to go back to the original question. Over the past few years, there have been a number of changes on the state and local level that have looked to reduce the criminal justice system response that we've traditionally had. With adoption of Measure 110, changing bail policies, and for instance, limiting when police can pull over motorists. Do you think we've swung too far in that direction? And kind of to tack it on, are there certain changes you'd want to see on the state or local level in the next 4 years?
Yeah, I mean, to be very specific, I mean, let's kind of go through those one by one. I mean, and let's be clear. Measure 110 was a failed experiment that Mike Schmidt was a cheerleader for and pushed for. And he led us down this path. And as much as he likes to run away from it, this was something he championed, and it was a disaster for us. It was a disaster for the everyday person that was suffering and dying on our streets. I mean, in 2022, we had over 500 people overdose. In 2023, we had over 600 people overdose. Why did it take so long? And for him to try to take any credit for that amendment is just outrageous, and it's really almost offensive. I mean, it was really the amendment itself was driven by a group that were doing a counter ballot measure, and they were the ones that pressured the state legislature to act. And we saw Senator Kate Lieber and Senator Jason Cruff were the ones that led that, you know, and so this is just outrageous that there is any credit that he tries to take for this. I mean, the fact of the matter is, it was well reported that he took $30,000 from the Drug Policy Alliance just, you know, days before this was enacted. And they, of course, were the group that was pushing for decriminalization. So, I mean, it's these bad policies that have really led to a big part of the crisis of where we are. Yes, fentanyl came along. Yes, that was unexpected, but you know, new drugs do come along. That's sadly a part of what we've seen. And what we need is a criminal, you know, criminal or public safety system that's actually engaged, that's there to work with both the ideas of how do we give and get individuals into treatment, and how do we actually effectively, you know, go after those individuals that are dealing these poisons on our streets. You know, right now we're facing a huge issue because of what was created by this. We had this vacuum where, you know, the cartels and, you know, drug dealers have moved in, and now, you know, it's a huge and massive issue that's going to need, you know, a serious prosecutor to actually tackle and work on. And we talk about, the next one is when we talk about Senate Bill 48. This was an absolutely, you know, direct result of Mike Schmidt's policies and pushing for this. You know, for him to try to lay this off onto the state legislature or someone else, you know, it's just a complete misstatement of this. I mean, this is really something he pushed for, and then he even testified in support of. And what it did and what it's doing currently is leading to all of these situations where there's just massive loopholes. I mean, just a few weeks ago, I got called by police because they were arresting a drug dealer who was dealing fentanyl with a gun for the 9th time. And that's 9 cases that were out there pending, each one where he would go in and be released. And this is one example of many. I mean, this happens throughout our county. Gresham has a very, you know, terrible example where there's an individual smashing out windows down Main Street. Went in, the police did their job, they arrested him. He got released in 4 hours. Went back out, smashed more windows. Arrested, back out. That happened 4 separate times. So there's no situation in which I think the public is going to sit back and look at what Mike Schmidt did with Senate Bill 48 and think that that was a good system and working, because that's not serving our community. And of course, that is going to be one of my efforts when at the next legislative session, is to bring in real reform to that, to end those loopholes and to really end that revolving door in front of the jail that was created by this. We have a situation where the public doesn't feel like our system works for them when they see people committing crimes over and over and over. We need real reform in this area. With Measure 110, we need someone who has got the experience to actually step up and deliver some real change to end the open air drug dealing, and to hopefully then start to build the trust networks and the support networks for individuals struggling with substance abuse disorder.
And beyond those two, are there any other specific things you'd want to see from the state legislature, either to tighten things up or move the criminal justice system in another direction?
Yeah, we've seen some other kind of, you know, really just sad examples where the state legislature failed to get funding towards one of the crime victims support groups. That's something that I would be a huge advocate for, is to see greater funding there. Of course, when it comes to issues with around ballot measure 110 reform and how we do that, I've been a huge proponent of how do we create a support network around those individuals struggling with substance abuse disorder. And it's really both at the front end and the back end. I mean, we need probation and parole officers that can help with that. We need to have as well that those individuals meeting people where they're at first contact on the street, and doing that countywide. Right now, we have a very small slice of that. And I've been a huge proponent and advocate for getting a detox center. It's been far too long. This has been a huge gap in our system for the past at least 4+ years, when we lost Hooper Detox. And it's, the fact that we're sitting here now in April of 2024, and we're just having some efforts by County Commissioner Julia Brim Edwards to kind of deliver on that. That's, it's unacceptable that it's taken this long.
Okay, great. I'd like to actually kind of move into Measure 110 and House Bill 4002 a little bit more. And Nathan, if you can go first on this. You actually did kind of talk a lot about it, but did you support, or do you support, the recriminalization of drug possession and providing deflection opportunities as HB 4002 outlines? And if so, how do you envision, or what do you envision that deflection system would include?
Yeah, I mean, so I did support recriminalization early on, and I can tell you I didn't vote for ballot measure 110 because, as someone inside of the criminal justice system, I saw that it was simply us putting up our hands and walking away and leaving, sadly, people to fend for themselves. And I've repeatedly said I do support the deflection system, because one thing that I have, I'm very fortunate in my life, is that my wife is an amazing person. She's getting her master's in trauma counseling, and she always reminds me that we need to be meeting people where they're at. And when for the past 20+ years, I've dealt with people struggling with substance abuse disorder, and really what it takes is you have to be there at every critical stage. And it's about, when we talk about what we've seen, I've been out with the bike officers for years, and what I've seen is, recently we started actually pairing them up with, with treatment providers and meeting people on that first contact. That would be an example of how you would roll out deflection. But we need to do that countywide, and we need to build those pathways and connections between each and every, individual street type unit out there. Because, the bike officers, yes, they're having plenty of contacts. But as we saw from the Multnomah County dashboard, this issue is diffused throughout our county, and we need to have a better approach countywide to how we're setting up this deflection system. So that's really kind of step one. And what I've said consistently, and I put on my website, was a very detailed plan of all the different phases in which we need to meet people at, because treatment and working with folks that are dealing with this, it is oftentimes 3 steps forward, 1 or 2 steps back, and then and that repeats itself over and over. It's never going to be as simple as, hey, we referred someone to treatment, good luck. We need to be providing the staff, the support network, housing, transportation, all of the things around that, if we're really going to make an impact. And that's something I'm going to dedicate myself to do as part of this. But the other side of this, and what I always believe is not enough of the conversation about, is that if we're to give these individuals a chance to do something better, to get in a situation or environment where they have a chance, we have to crush the cartels and the drug dealers that are out there right now doing this. And I have a very detailed plan for how to do that. I'm looking at, I'm someone that throughout my career, I've built teams and efforts to attack this. And I'm looking at specifically a way in which I'm going to organize 3 separate teams. There's going to be one that's going to be very street level, that will work with officers in both, kind of your neighborhood response officers, your sheriff's deputies. These are the people that are dealing with your street level drug dealers. And a lot of those, sadly, we're seeing a lot of them are things like juveniles, and we're going to be pushing a lot of that towards deflection and things of that nature. But when it comes to drug dealing, we're going to be having those individuals actively out there stopping it on the street. Then we're going to have a second team, which is going to deal with overdose deaths. that team will use the Lynn bias laws and will be ones that will be dedicated towards actually investigating those deaths when we tragically lose people to this, and then go after the dealers that led to their death. And then those two teams will feed up to a third team, which will be a regional team that will have my deputy DAs cross-designated in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And each one of those teams will have a deputy DA assigned to it as well. And then throughout that, all of this will be designed to lead up towards the idea of how do we get our arms around this problem? How do we, start with the street level and work all the way up the chain? And then, of course, work with our federal partners to do as much as we can to do the interdiction to really, and this is focused at getting at the money and the drugs, the drugs coming into our community and the money going out. And it will be looking at how do we attack those individuals who are profiting from the death that's happening in our community. And I'm dedicated to that. And it's something like I said, I've done this throughout my career. I know I can build these teams, and I have a very specific plan for how we can attack it.
Thank you. Mike, same question for you about your stance on both the recriminalization of drug possession and deflection, and what specific ideas would you want to build into a deflection system?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited about House Bill 4002. I think that this could end up being a model for the country. The way that it was built, and again, I do think, just to call it out, how my opponent, Mr. Vasquez, gives me all the credit for passing Senate Bill 48. But even though I testified and was intimately involved in the creation of 4002, somehow no credit for that. It's interesting. But
well, can I ask, when did you start supporting recriminalization of possession?
So I first put out in August of last year a memo to the legislature that I supported criminalization of open drug use. So that was the first thing that we put out. And then we were in conversations with the legislature throughout as they walked up to the session, and then when they were involved in the session. So it really started in August of last year when I first put out that first memo to the legislature on the changes that needed to happen to Measure 110.
But that didn't include possession itself. It was public use, right?
That was public use. That's right. And so over the course of talking with the legislatures and building this deflection system and the rest of the legislation, which I'm very excited about, that's where we got to. That's where I got to supportive of this new way of going forward. So it starts with deflection, and just to walk through 4002 a little bit. Starts with deflection. So an officer sees somebody on the streets, and now they will have an opportunity to say, hey, instead of arresting you right now, I can take you to this resource, or a resource can come to us, and we're going to get you connected to treatment. If that fails, now the arrest happens, but there's something built into the bill that's called conditional discharge, which means that as the prosecuting attorney, I can still offer people the ability to avoid the conviction if they engage in treatment. So they essentially have another chance. And that's really important because we worked with immigration attorneys to craft that very specifically to avoid immigration consequences if somebody is arrested and convicted of possession. If that still fails, if they still don't connect with treatment, it'll be a normal prosecution where they would ultimately be convicted of possession of the controlled substance. But even then, we built into the legislation automated expungement. So for the first time in Oregon's history, no matter what, you will have that crime expunged in 3 years automatically. You don't have to apply for it. You don't have to go through some other thing. It's going to happen, which is crucial because a lot of the conversation around this, the criminalization of drugs, has been the collateral consequences, and especially the collateral consequences disproportionately borne by our minority communities. The data is have known for a long time. And I've been in this conversation for almost a decade at this point, starting back when we got the law changed in 2017 to drop possession of controlled substance from a felony to a misdemeanor. We know that our communities use drugs at relatively similar rates. The SAMHSA data shows us that. But we know who's arrested for using drugs and possessing drugs is wildly disparate. And so building in automated expungement into this legislation, the first time that's existed in Oregon, is crucial to help ameliorate some of those collateral consequences that are disproportionately borne by more minority communities. And as the Criminal Justice Commission pointed out, they anticipate that this will have a disproportionate impact on minority communities. So building an automatic expungement was crucial. And then finally, in fourth, if all else fails, you failed deflection, you failed conditional discharge, you were convicted and you failed probation, you get revoked. For the first time ever, we built into the misdemeanor that when you're revoked, you can serve the rest of your sentence in a treatment facility. So it's almost like what you've done with some of our felony crimes, where you can have that discharge into a treatment space and get credit for the time that you were supposed to be in jail, but in a treatment facility. So I'm excited about 4002 because at every step of the way, it kind of ratchets up the legal consequences, but also gives people the opportunity to engage in treatment and then hopefully ameliorate some of those collateral consequences. The key for deflection with me, and we're having a lot of conversations right now with our police agencies, because Multnomah County has tried LEAD before. You all are probably familiar with LEAD. It's the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program that was first created up in King County in Seattle. We tried that. It didn't take hold here in Portland. It didn't work. And when I'm talking to people about why that happened, the feedback I'm getting is because essentially police officers didn't buy in. And the reason that they didn't buy in is because the promised resources and things that were supposed to be set up for them to utilize didn't materialize, or weren't 24/7, or weren't actually helpful when they needed them. So I think as we're talking about building deflection, we have to build it so that it's useful to police officers and that they will actually go in and be able to make it a tool in their tool belt. But it has to exist 24/7 around the clock. And in different parts of our county, it has to look different. Gresham officers are not going to drive to downtown Portland to a drop-off site, nor should they. So we have to do something local for Gresham. So we're in conversations with GPD. We have to talk specifically to the sheriff and her deputies, which have different considerations as they're on TriMet, which is probably going to be where they get their biggest book of business from possession of controlled substance. And then, of course, PPB. And so we're going to have to go agency by agency to design these deflection programs. But it has to not only be useful to the police, we have to make it easier for them than it is to take somebody and lodge them into jail, if that's what we want them to do. And so there's a little bit of behavioral economics at play that we have to figure out. And we're talking right now with the chiefs and all these agencies and the sheriff to say, how can we make this even easier for your folks so that this is a useful tool for them? And that's how deflection is going to be successful. And it has to be, because mind you, on the back end, we still don't have enough defense attorneys, and we are being told by the defense bar that there won't be attorneys to handle these cases. So that's another problem. Deflection has to work. It has to be successful.
Thanks very much. Mike, if you can go first on this question. The city of Portland has increasingly sought to restrict camping on public land. Should the DA's office be involved in shaping that policy, and would enforcement of these kind of restrictions be a priority for you?
The DA's office should be involved in these conversations. And it's been my experience over these 4 years of seeing the city writing ordinances that are practically incredibly challenging to enforce, or enforce the way that the city is contemplating them to be enforced for legal reasons. I mean, we are the agency that actually would be in court, if assuming that these are misdemeanors. That would be doing the enforcement. So we need to be involved, and we have given that feedback and expertise to the city when they have chosen to consult us on their ordinances and proposals on where we think the challenges are in implementation. I think that in terms of enforcement, we absolutely play a role. We want to see that our streets are clean and they're safe and welcoming for everybody. And I think the enforcement is one side of that coin, but the other side of that coin is, how can we alleviate barriers in front of people that keep them into homelessness? And that's what I'm hearing from a lot of housing providers, is that they get a client and they're working with them, they're excited and they want to get them into housing, but then they have a conviction on their record that makes them ineligible to be housed. So I got to travel with a group of folks from Portland, Multnomah County, to go to San Diego, where they have led on what they call Homelessness Court, a program that's a couple decades old. It's now being spread throughout the country. The American Bar Association has said they've spread it to, I think, over 70 sites now around the country. But the idea kind of flips the old prosecutor dynamic on its head. What it does is, instead of the old dynamic, which is, we're going to prosecute you for this crime unless you do X, Y, or Z, It works with the service providers. And what we are developing right now and have an MOU with 8 different service providers in our community is that when somebody engages with them for whatever reason, they walk through the front door of Central City Concern and they say, hey, I want to work on my issues. My goal is to get into housing. Then Central City Concern is developing a curriculum, as is all of these other agencies are developing a curriculum, that if a person actually engages in it, they have an agreement with my office that once a person does the work of completing those things, I will do everything I can to make sure that their records expunged, fines and fees are forgiven. We have Senate Bill 819, which gives me more authority and latitude than ever before to actually get rid of convictions that might be holding back, so long as they're doing the work. So instead of the old punitive-based model, it's an incentive-based model. And anybody who knows any of the research knows that incentives work better than punishments. So I'm very excited to launch that. I think that the DA's office can absolutely be a partner in helping make sure that people have more access to housing and are more swiftly able to get off of our streets.
So I'm sorry, I'm a little bit unclear in terms of just the role. I understand on the back end in terms of seeking to expunge convictions, et cetera. But if there is a situation where the city enacts a camping restriction ordinance and something comes to your office, would you be prosecuting that?
I mean, to date, they've not managed to get an ordinance that is constitutional. And I know that there are major court cases up in the Supreme Court right now that are looking at some of those issues. But yeah, if we have a constitutional law, I mean, what I've seen, I haven't reviewed Ted Wheeler's most recent proposal, but what I understand about it, that would be constitutional, and that would certainly be something that we would enforce. So yeah, if we have an enforceable law that comes from the city, yeah, we would absolutely work with them to enforce it.
Great, thank you. Nathan, same question for you. The city looks to increasingly restrict camping. Should the DA's office be involved in shaping that policy, and would that be a priority for you to enforce?
So yes, that would be a priority for me to enforce, and absolutely the DA should be involved. In fact, I'm shocked that for the past 4 years we haven't. I mean, throughout my entire career, we were always, working with the city attorney's office because we had an elected DA who was out there working with the mayor, working with city commissioners to actually help write these laws. In fact, a lot of the city ordinances we saw in the past, they were, made it through constitutional and statutory muster because we were there hand in hand working with them. Sadly, that collaborative effort has just been lacking for past 4 years. It just isn't there. And so now we're in this very passive, role, and where, we are sitting there waiting to see what comes out of City Hall, and then they come out and it has lots of issues and problems. When we have an effective leader, you have someone who's active, who gets in there, who works with, builds the partnerships, and that's what we need. Yes, of course, the Supreme Court is up reviewing the Grants Pass case right now, and it will look at things like, do we need to have all of the housing in place before we can enact these types of daylight camping restrictions, things of that nature? Yes, I've read Mayor Wheeler's proposal. I've read Renee Gonzalez's proposal. I think they're moving in the right direction. Yes, I'm a huge proponent of we need actually to have the housing in place. And what I've talked about, throughout this campaign is we should actually have a system. Then this is nothing magical, but that actually categorizes and tells us what shelter beds are available, so that officers, treatment providers know and can just simply refer people directly to it. I mean, hotels do it every single day. So there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to have that. And there's no reason we shouldn't have had that years ago, particularly under the current administration. This is something that we have seen an explosion of. We've seen, all types of efforts throughout our county, both by nonprofits, by government agencies, but yet we have no one really actually out there trying to be the hub of the wheel. And it's something that I preach constantly, which is the district attorney's office. We can't solve all problems. That's a given, but we can be that center hub of a wheel where we're help coordinating, we're help pushing, we're being a community leader. And we're not taking some passive role, just saying, well, we'll wait and see what comes out of city council. In my entire career, what I've seen were examples where the elected DA came forward and said, hey, we're going to help build the teams, collaborate with the various system partners to help be a part of the solution. And that's exactly where I'm going to be throughout this issue, is being right in the middle, helping build a collaborative effort to be a part of the solution.
Great, thank you. Nathan, what actions should the DA's office or can the DA's office take to keep cases going despite the ongoing public defender shortage?
Yeah. Well, there's three kind of areas that I like to talk about this. There's the short term, the medium term, and the long term. So in the short term, I do believe, I don't find it acceptable that we're having cases dismissed. And I think the district attorney's office, again, should be active in this approach. We should be taking on this, the idea of being at the center of the wheel and building a collaborative effort. So short term, we should be bringing forth the civil attorneys out there that are willing, interested, and able to do this work. Yes, some of those efforts have been tried. They didn't go forward. That doesn't mean you give up. A true leader always will face a hurdle. And the question is, what do we do to move forward? Because here we're talking about victims not getting justice. We have, literally 1,000, perhaps more cases just sitting in our office right now that aren't moving forward because there's no criminal defense attorney. Those are felony property crimes like stolen motor vehicles, like people stealing well over $1,000, smashing out windows of our businesses. And I just simply, I'm not going to sit on my hands and wait, passively to see some solution come forward. I'm going to push. I've already had conversations with attorneys out in the community that are willing and interested in doing this. And so we do need to create those short-term connections and pathways to do that. In the kind of what I'm going to call the medium range, we need to demand accountability and transparency. So approximately 3 years ago, there was a change in our state legislature on how they administered these contracts. They moved away from a system where they paid on a per case basis, and they went to what they called the 300-point system. And since then, we've been in crisis. Now, the state legislature came in, they dumped in about $100 million, somewhere in that range, to the system. That hasn't moved the needle. So we're in a situation where dumping more money into it isn't solving it. So, when we look at this, the Willamette Week actually did an article on this and looked at specifically, what were the rates and, the amount of cases that these various defense attorney firms were taking. And they found some really, I think, interesting, information. One was that the two largest firms were taking well under the 300 rate. It's somewhere in the 70 to 80% range, whereas the smaller consortium firm, they were taking cases at 122% the rate. So this, in my mind, shows us that we need to demand accountability and transparency. Also, there's things like out there that, some of the case counts include cases that are in warrant status or ones where maybe they helped someone resolve a warrant but didn't actually take on the case. I don't find that acceptable. We need to demand real accountability. As a prosecutor, no, I can't go out and hire defense attorneys, but I can certainly be a strong and powerful voice, an active participant in saying, our community, our victims, we need a system that works. And so both in the short term and the medium term, I'm going to push for those types of solutions. And it is about going to the legislature and writing some of that in. There are policies that I've seen very specifically written on how we can demand that type of accountability. It also happens that judges right now, they are sadly in a passive role in the sense that if they have, let's say, 10 cases that come before them, it's the defense attorneys who get to select which cases get appointed. And the judges have little or no insight into what are their caseloads. Why isn't the judges that are making those decisions? I don't think it should be the prosecutor, but I certainly think the judges should have that ability and authority to look at that. That needs to be a legislative change. In the long term, we do. As a state, we need to come to terms and look at, hey, do we need to get away from these nonprofit, public defense firms, and do we need to get to just a fully state-run system, something that it has a somewhat parallel process to the district attorney's office? Other states do that. They have situations that are working and healthy. So we need to be pushing, and you need an active district attorney who is there to actually help roll up his sleeves and get involved and deal with these issues.
Great, thank you. Mike, same question for you. What should or can the DA's office be doing on the ongoing public defender crisis to keep cases going forward?
Yeah, so obviously this has been one of the biggest challenges over my first term is not having enough public defenders and seeing what that means to victims. And also seeing what that means to other victims, because a lot of times when we can't intercede and stop the behavior because somebody's cases gets dismissed, then they go out and commit another crime. And we've seen that happen too many times. So what have I done? Well, one of the things I did, and I've done press conferences on this. I know you all know that because some of you have been at them. I put out every week how many cases have been dismissed. I try to keep this issue in the media, in the public, so that people understand what's going on. We developed an early resolution program. Washington County did one that was similar. I think there was some merit to what they were doing in terms of an approach, because it is about, can we do something that's better than cases being dismissed? So we have an early resolution program when somebody doesn't have a public defender and they want to take accountability and resolve the case expeditiously. There is an attorney and a resource that has been paid for by OPDS to be available to help people through that process. So that is working, that is resolving cases that would otherwise likely just be ultimately dismissed and then back in our office doing double work of taking it back to grand jury, re-indicting it, bringing the victim, bringing the witnesses, the police officers back to redo all the work that we've done before. So that's a short-term solution, should not be a long-term solution, but right now we're just trying to get things fixed. I sat on the legislative committee with folks from bipartisan across the aisle in the legislature. We secured the additional investments into the system. I disagree with Mr. Vasquez that that's not having an impact. I think it is having an impact. We're still seeing cases not being picked up at the rates that we need. But what I'm being told when you actually look at the data is that the attrition levels in the public defense firms are going down. So we should see that is continuing to build their resources and the supply of attorneys. It's long term. I mean, we don't have enough people coming out of law schools in Oregon to take all the positions we need filled. Something that was kind of glossed over in Nathan's answer was how did we get here? Why are we here? And that's because of the unconstitutional issues of our previous public defense system. That's why we went to the MAC system of saying, hey, this is what caseloads should look like. And you'll notice that Oregon is not the only state facing these challenges. Washington State is going through the exact same thing right now. So this is not something that's even local. This is something that's national. As the ABA is putting out standards of what ethical representation looks like, you're going to see states across the country coming into not having enough public defenders. So this is a long-term, unfortunate problem that needs to continue to work. Investment is one part of that. But we also need to retain the attorneys that are stepping into the field so they don't just get 2 years of trial experience and immediately jump out to a better paying job. We need to do things I think we should incentivize people to enter the field with more aggressive student loan forgiveness programs. I think those are types of solutions that the legislature can pursue to try to entice more people to come into the profession. The whole civil attorney thing, that was tried by Chief Justice Martha Walters. That flopped pretty spectacularly. If Mr. Vasquez can fix that with his friends that he's talking to, I don't see what's stopping him from doing that. It's the fact of the matter is that's been tried. It's not worked. I think longer term, we just need to keep building, keep having more people. There should be transparency in the contracts. And I mean, these are state funds that the state is paying for the service providers to provide a service. I think it's absolutely appropriate for there to be transparency in those contracts so that we can see how those funds are being used. So I think that's something that could be built more into the contract side of things. I do think it's a positive that in the legislation that was passed in the last long session, the Office of Public Defense Services, which I think was recently renamed, is moving to the executive branch, whereas previously it was in the judicial branch. So as of January 1st, it'll be underneath Governor Tina Kotek. I think that's a positive step, and I'm hoping that with that gubernatorial kind of oversight and accountability, that we will see some more improvements being made. So I think this is not a short-term thing, and I think you're going to continue to see more and more states across the country struggling with what Oregon's struggling with right now, but we are making some progress.
Great. I do want to follow up just a bit because when you first came out with the, nearly 300 cases have been dismissed, courts have dismissed them due to a lack of a public defender. We kind of looked through some of those cases, and a number of them weren't dismissed by the court, but were dismissed because your office had failed to take the case to a grand jury before the felony information had expired. When we talked about that at that time, you said that was, and your office kind of followed up with emails, that this was a requirement because defendants have a right to counsel to testify in front of the grand jury. Is that still your office policy, that if someone does not have an attorney at the time of the felony information or at the arraignment, that you will not proceed to grand jury?
Helen, I'd have to actually go back and look specifically about that issue. It's been, I remember the conversation. I remember going through it and having this, but it's been a little while since I've talked to my attorneys in terms of how we're approaching that. But I know that there are, because of the way the statute's written, that there are constitutional requirements, or not constitutional, statutory requirements, that the defendant has a right to testify. And so I'd have to go back and answer that question and find out specifically that level of detail for you.
So at this point, you don't know if it is still a policy to not go to grand jury if that defendant does not have an attorney appointed at the time of the arraignment?
I'd have to go back and look at
Okay.
that. But I'm happy to follow up. It wouldn't take me long to follow up on.
Great. Mike, this question is for you. And, you've been accused of many things by both prosecutors and a victim advocate who have left their office in the past few years. There have been accusations of mismanagement, retaliation, discrimination. Boley found substantial evidence of retaliation and discrimination in the handling of in a complaint filed by one of your former longtime prosecutors. Also, one of your chief deputy DAs recently has accused you of retaliation as well against another prosecutor for supporting your opponent. What is your response or defense to these many allegations?
Well, so I think you really have to go case by case. So we're talking about 4 allegations over 4 years, is essentially 5 if you count the victim advocate, what her letter to the agency was. So you got to go case by case. The very first one was involving Amber Kinney, who is, on Nathan's website as one of his endorsers. She opposed me in the previous election. She alleged that she didn't get promoted because of her gender. When that allegation was made, I took it very seriously. I went to Chair Deborah Kafori. I said, hey, this allegation's been made. We need an outside investigation of this. And the county selected and retained Baron Liebman to do that investigation. I had no control, no oversight whatsoever of that investigation. They took over a year. They interviewed dozens of attorneys in my office, and they came out and said that there was no substantiation of any findings of discrimination. Now, you note and correctly note that Boley, with doing much less of an investigation, came to a different conclusion. So we have 2 different conclusions from 2 different outside looks at that situation. No lawsuit has been filed in that case. So that's where that is right now. Ultimately, the allegation was that she didn't get the promotion that she wanted to get. Ironically, when she resigned due to that, it was because I promoted one of her female colleagues into a level 4 position instead of her. That was conspicuously left out of any of her allegations. So we're talking about a promotional disagreement. I take it very seriously when those allegations are made. That's why we did an outside investigation. The next one had to do with an attorney in my office who was out on FMLA leave. One of my chief district attorneys, Kirsten Snowden, sent a text message to that attorney and said, insinuated through the text message, or it could have been read to insinuate, that she wasn't considered for promotion because she was out of the office on leave. That's not appropriate. That's not acceptable. It's not okay. We settled that with that attorney. And so we came to an amicable agreement. We settled that situation. The following one, actually, which is still in front of Boley right now, so I'm not going to say too much about it, but essentially stems out of an odd situation where one of my attorneys had somebody in her family charged with a crime by a different attorney in my office. And her belief, or at least what she has alleged, is that she believes that was retaliatory because of some interpersonal disagreements between her and the other attorney. That's currently being investigated outside of the agency. It's at Bully right now. We worked with DOJ to do an investigation and get that to them. And so, we'll see how that goes through the process, what their findings are. But at the end of the day, I'm confident that it was not a retaliatory charging decision made by one of the deputy DAs in my office. The victim's advocate who left and resigned, I thought she brought up some really important points, and I took it very seriously. I took it to heart. I engaged some outside folks to come in and do an audit of our victim advocate program, and they wrote a report about things that we should work on, and we've been implementing those things ever since. I think we're making really great progress in the victim advocate program. So, it was a program that I inherited. I hadn't done anything to change the program whatsoever when I took over as DA. I've been handling a lot of different fires, but she brought some really valid points to my attention. And I took it seriously and asked for that outside evaluation. And now we're working on those issues. The final complaint alleged by my chief deputy, Kirsten Snowden, who I've already mentioned as I've talked through these cases, has to do with a man not getting promoted. And instead, I promoted a woman prosecutor into that position. Her allegation is I made that decision because he's a friend of Nathan Vasquez. That will go through the process too. That is being, looked into and investigated as I take all of these things very seriously. But I think something that is very relevant for anybody who's trying to evaluate that to know is that attorney who didn't get that promotion, he resigned when I became the district attorney. I actually hired him back into the agency. So if I had any ill will against this man for any affiliations or anything else, why would I have hired him back into the agency? So he resigned, and I chose not to promote him into a leadership position. I chose to promote a very adept and great woman who is now helping head up that important unit for me. So, that one I think especially is a very political and timed very politically, and I think you should take it in the context of this election. So, I think when you lump it all together and you say, oh, there's all these things, it's really important to take it case by case because these are very specific things over 4 years and an agency of 260 people.
Right. But there's also allegations of mismanagement. And that's kind of that was front and center with the victims advocates letter. But it's also been an element of some of the others in terms of a lack of training for a lot of the newer prosecutors, for instance. Do you feel like there has been that kind of lack of attention?
Oh, I think training is something that we absolutely need to do more of. I mean, but these are not things that problems that didn't exist in the prior administrations. So yes, we need better training. The way that new prosecutors are coming online and getting trained are the exact same ways that I did back when I was in 2007, starting as an intern. Probably the exact same way when Nathan was in 2000. Like, it's not an area where we have the resources. I'd like to have a trainer. We actually do have a volunteer senior attorney who comes into the office and he watches our misdemeanor attorneys in trial and gives them feedback and pointers and things like that. So we're trying to build in some things, but we don't have a training resource. It's something that I've advocated for at the county. I'd love to get that resource so that we could have somebody to actually train the attorneys. But look, we've been a really thin agency for a long time. One of the things I'm most proud of is building this agency back in terms of budget and resources. It's pretty unprecedented what we've accomplished in the last 4 years in terms of $15 million of growth and adding prosecutors to the agency. We're really turned around decades worth of disinvestment. So we need to do better jobs of training, absolutely, but these are not new problems. These are problems that have been inherited and that, I would continue to try to make better.
Great. Before I ask you, Nathan, a question, can we go about 5 minutes longer? Do you guys have a hard stop?
5 minutes is fine, Helen.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That's fine with me. Yeah.
Okay. So Nathan, if you want to respond to that, I'm going to let you do that in kind of a closing statement. I'd like to ask you this other question first. You've been a prosecutor for 23 years with a deputy or with a Multnomah County DA's office, or 24 years. But that doesn't necessarily mean you'll be a good manager. Can you point to anything in your experience that shows that you can manage an office with a $50 million budget and 200, I'm sorry, I can't remember, 200 plus employees?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when we talk about that, we start with about the trust and the confidence of those that you're going to lead. And that's something that I think is unquestioned. I have, for years I've supervised folks that have, that wildly support me, that show up for me because I've showed up for them. The attorneys in my office, they have very clearly heard from both the elected DA and they heard from me, and they have endorsed me because they want change. They want to see a leader who's actually invested in them and that isn't going to give excuses about why we haven't had training when in fact he spent over $200,000 a year on one of his good friends to be his policy advisor. Money that could have been spent for those attorneys to actually be trained. So what it comes down to is this. My leadership has always been about creating a culture that motivates those around me. I build those up and help them obtain the skills so that they can reach their highest levels. And when it comes to that, if you have true trust and you can build with, use objective criteria to actually help people get promoted in a way that they don't feel discriminated against, where there aren't multiple discrimination claims, because, one discrimination claim, that's too many. 4 is a pattern. And it's just, this is something that this office is looking for a leader who's going to come in and end this pattern of discrimination. And for me, I know because I see every day the young folks that work under me that I mentor and that I help, they are striving and succeeding and thriving under my leadership. And that's what I'm going to bring to the entire office. I always cite this example because I think it's so critical when we're talking about leadership. A good leader certainly leads by example, and I do that every single day. But also, a good leader celebrates his or her employees and doesn't jump out and try to take credit like Mike Schmidt does for all their hard work. A good leader is someone who builds up their employees. And that's why I'm always very careful when I talk about, hey, I did this for the office, or I did that. I helped, create the Port of Portland position. I helped, do that. I worked with the Port of Portland to get that. And hey, under my unit, we also expanded the TriMet position. But I'm always very careful to say that was because of Julian Samuels. Because Julian was the one who came to me and said, hey, I really think we have an opportunity here. And I said, great, Julian, go do it. I want to see you put this together. And he wrote up a proposal. He worked hard. Yes, he pushed it up to Mike Schmidt. And yes, TriMet ultimately agreed to this, but it was Julian. And that's what people appreciate. That's what they want. They want to see the leader who celebrates them, that helps them strive and reach their goals. And what they want, above all, is a clear vision, a clear approach to how do we serve the public? How do we give the community the public safety they want? And I can tell you, the vision in our office is cloudy at best. I will always put forth a vision that is based upon that's simple, clean, and is for the community. And that's to do the right thing for the right reasons. And when I'm leader, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Just because we're running short on time, and I realized
Yeah.
that that Therese had wanted to also ask regarding transparency.
Yeah, I had one quick question, and this I guess would go to you first, Nathan. And it's about your general philosophy on government transparency, given the DA's role in public records disputes, and whether you think the office currently is striking the appropriate balance between disclosure and confidentiality, or you would anticipate any changes there.
I do anticipate changes. I think that we're not doing enough to be transparent. While I will always step back and say, Mike Schmidt has done a lot to advance transparency. He put together a data dashboard, and there's better transparency with that. However, there is a massive lack of transparency when we talk about the commutations that were done by our office. We are seeing hundreds of these cases come through, and we have no insight into what's happening with those. And these are critical. We're talking about cases in which the district attorney is supporting the release of people convicted of aggravated murder and a whole host of other crimes. And so we don't have the transparency around that should be there. And this is one that, quite frankly, is something that under my administration, I do intend to continue to do the important work of the Justice Integrity Unit, but do it in a more transparent manner where the community can have the insights into that so that we can do that. When it comes to public records, I believe that, yes, we have to strike the right balance between protecting open investigations, but we also need to be as transparent as possible in that area.
Mike, same question to you. Do you feel like, what's your general philosophy on government transparency? And do you think that the the public records orders from the district attorney's office are striking the right balance between disclosure and confidentiality?
I do think they're striking the right balance. I like to think that I err on the side of transparency. You know, as you all know, as the recipients of a lot of those orders from the fantastic work of Adam Gibbs, who really does a great job in putting those together. Sometimes it really is a call, right? Sometimes there's clear precedence and it's just obvious, and you're like, hey, this is going to be disclosed, this is not. But sometimes it's like, this could go either way. The order could be written to disclose, or the order could be written in a way not to. And it's been my guiding philosophy that we do the public's work, and we are, for whatever reason, district attorneys are in the position of calling the balls and strikes in this area. And so it's been my position with Adam that when we can disclose, and it's pursuant to the law, that we err on that side. And I hope you have seen that as a news agency.
Great, thank you. It's up to you guys if you have the time, but I'm willing to give you guys each a minute to give a closing wrap-up statement. Sound good?
Yes, I have the time.
Great. Actually, Nathan, why don't you go first, and then Mike, you can have the last word since Nathan started it all off.
Okay, well, first, I'll tell you that if I'm elected this May, I will be the first Latino ever elected into the position of district attorney for Multnomah County. And I look forward to that because I believe Portland's best days are ahead of us. We need change. We need to move into a new space with new ideas, and I'm stepping forward to bring those to our community. And those are based upon a lot of experience, a lot of building teams, a lot of working throughout the community to bring together law enforcement and community agencies and community-based organizations. Because if we're going to move together, we need to do it collectively as a community. And what it comes down to is simple. There's a choice. You have a path that we've been going down for 4 years. It's lined with discrimination, a lot of which we heard Mike Schmidt just gloss over and miss some of the biggest components. And it's really emblematic of how he fails to listen to women. And what we see is that that path is also lined with record high crime. And even some of the slight drops we've seen in homicides have really started to turn around again, as we've recently seen that Oregon is really one of the leading cities on the West Coast for homicides right now, this year alone. We have more homicides than San Francisco and Seattle combined right now. And we're in a situation where we need leadership and we need change. And I'm here to offer those as a way to bring our community back to a healthy and safe place by combining compassion and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mike.
Yeah, thanks for the conversation today. I think what's crucial in a district attorney is somebody who can look at the challenges, work collaboratively, take them head on, and then show results. And that's what I've done. You know, I've had to be very adept and pivot over the course of my first 4 years from crisis to crisis to crisis. My opponent likes to gloss over the fact that we made it through a pandemic, that a lot of these issues are externalities that have come into our community. But in every single one of those situations, whether it's gun violence and me reorganizing our office to have a homicide unit, but also focusing on crime prevention, which is crucial because we're a reactive agency. We're always chasing, but you got to do the prevention work, partnering with OHSU to get different results there, and partnering with our Attorney General to advocate for common sense gun legislation reform. Like when I testified to make ghost guns illegal with the Attorney General, we finally got that across the line this year. Whether it's been catalytic converter thefts, which our legislation has seen a dramatic decrease in those, auto theft, retail theft, and now most recently, you know, fixing Measure 110 to go forward with 4002. I have, no matter what the issue that has faced us, I've shown leadership. I've come together with my office to address those issues, and now we're seeing results. My opponent likes to say, oh, everything's terrible, fear. He wants to use fear and division to try to make people scared, but it's not borne out by the facts. Like, look around our community. Things are getting much better. Businesses are moving back into our community. Yes, we have gone through some incredibly serious challenges, but things are getting better, and crime is down across the board in almost every single category that it's measured. And that's not just because of me or just because of the work in my office. That's because of a collaborative approach and people that are leaning in together in ways that are really meaningful. And so what you can't predict is the future. You can't predict what crisis is going to come up tomorrow or the next day or the next day. And it really has been that for the last 4 years. But what you can do is look at a leader who shows up for those issues, and then how did they respond, and are you getting results? My opponent has 0 managerial experience, which he completely didn't answer your question on that. And he has no demonstrated ability to collaborate. I've got endorsements from across the legislature, almost every single elected official around our region, community-based groups. That's what it takes to have a leader in this office that can collaborate and show results. So that's why I'm running again. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. We really appreciate the time and the conversation. We'll be in touch if we have any more additional questions, but until, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you.